This is a story about two of the most celebrated English courtesans of the 18th century. One, Fanny Murray, was born in Bath, and the second, Kitty Fisher, died in Bath. Now, my information about Fanny Murray comes almost exclusively from a book by Barbara White called Queen of the Courtesans. Barbara, of course, was head honcho at ASE before Mr Jonathan Hope. One of ASE's most long-standing tutors, John Stevenson, is quoted on the cover as saying, "A terrific read, scholarly and scandalous in turn." Well, that's a fine combination, and it's a very impressive and enjoyable book. Now, Fanny Murray. It's generally agreed that she was born in Bath, Francis Rudman, in 1729 as the only surviving triplet of Thomas Rudman, a local musician. Now, it's generally said that she was orphaned by the age of 12 and all alone in the world, but Barbara White has discovered that actually her father outlived her and that Fanny sent him money all her life. She also had two surviving younger sisters who she helped financially when she hit the big time. Now, we know that at the age of 12, Fanny was selling flowers on the streets of Bath. She would spend her day following the company, as the elite visitors of Bath were called, on their usual daily round. It started early in the morning with a visit to the baths, and Fanny would be outside hoping to sell her flowers to the grand ladies, who would then place them on trays that were floated in the water in front of them. And it was hoped that the flowers would ward off the smells of the waters or perhaps of the bathers. Now, at the age of 13, it's possible that Fanny was selling rather more than flowers. We don't exactly know. But prostitution was rife in 18th century Bath. It was quite a licentious place. And one local historian has said that you were just as likely to catch the pox as to get the cure when you came to Bath. It was quite a sexually charged atmosphere. It's said that Fanny was seduced by the honourable, or not so honourable, John Spencer, who was the grandson of John and Sarah Churchill, the Duke and Duchess of Marlborough. The grandson was a bit of a disappointment. He was a rake, a ne'er-do-well, a scoundrel, and a drunk, an alcoholic in fact. And after seducing Fanny, he soon got tired of her and abandoned her without any provision. At this stage enter our old friend Beau Nash, who is 67 years old. He is gouty, he's toothless. He had been turned down, a proposal of marriage turned down in his youth, and so he had rejected marriage all his life in favour of a succession of mistresses. And he invited Fanny Murray to live with him at his house in St John's Court. He was 67 years old, she was 13, perhaps 14 at this stage. So it doesn't bear thinking about. But it's undeniable that Nash prepared Fanny for her future as a celebrated courtesan later in her life. So for the first time she was experiencing luxury. All her expenses were paid for. As far as we know, he didn't take her on various social events that he went to in Bath, but he trained her on how to adjust to polite society. He transformed her in terms of manners, in terms of conversation and bearing and so on. And after a year of this tuition, Fanny decided it was time for a change. She changed her name to Fanny Murray and she set off for the bright lights of London. Initially, things didn't go terribly well for Fanny when she arrived in London. She had to take her position as a dress lodger, which was essentially an indentured prostitute who had to give up most of their income in order to pay for the clothing they had to wear to attract clients. When she was working for Madame Maddox, who had an establishment near the Old Bailey, of her weekly earnings of £5, 10 shillings and sixpence, sorry, that's in old money, she had to give the vast majority of it for her board and lodging and dress and so on, and she kept just sixpence of that amount of money. So not surprisingly, she was in debt for most of the time. After a year or so, things began to improve when she appeared in a publication called Jack Harris's List of Covent Garden Ladies, and she began to attract a better class of client. People such as John Montagu, the Earl of Sandwich, and Sir Richard Atkins, who was actually just a couple of years older than Fanny, and for the next 8 years was Fanny's main source of income. For those 8 years, Fanny Murray became a true celebrity, a leader of fashion. Women who wouldn't have dreamt of mixing with her socially copied her low-cut dresses and the broad-brimmed Fanny Murray hat. She was regarded as having a perfect oval face with coral lips and chestnut hair, and portraits of her were copied and sold by the thousand. She had several racehorses named after her. There was an outpouring of adulation in poetry, in paintings, in fashion, and in gossip. That most famous 18th century gossip, Horace Walpole, provides this anecdote. I'll go into Horace Walpole mode at this moment. I liked Fanny Murray's spirit in an instance I heard the other night. She was complaining of lack of money. Sir Richard Atkins immediately gave her a £20 note. She said, "Damn your £20, what does it signify?" Clapped it between 2 pieces of bread and butter and ate it. Well, that story may well be apocryphal, and it was applied to other courtesans, as we shall hear later. But it does, I think, indicate the certain impetuous nature of Fanny Murray. She spent money as soon as she earned it. She was very generous to family and friends. And she supported the Lock Hospital, which had been set up to treat prostitutes' venereal disease. Well, after 8 years or so, when she was 27, she decided it was time, I think, for a more secure future. And so she contacted the son of the man who had seduced her all those years ago in Bath. John Spencer, first Earl Spencer, was determined to make amends for what his father had done. He wrote to the Scottish actor David Ross and suggested that he should marry Fanny Murray in return for £160 a year. And after a 5-month courtship, David Ross agreed. And they were married for 22 years, a relatively quiet and secluded time. And in 1778, Fanny Murray died at the age of 49. Lucy Locket lost her pocket. Kitty Fisher found it. Not a penny was there in it, but a ribbon round it. Now, I don't know if that children's rhyme crossed the Atlantic, but generations of British children have chanted that without really realising what was behind the story, and perhaps that's just as well. So a pocket was a prostitute's client, and Lucy Locket, who is believed to have been a barmaid in the Old Cock Tavern in Fleet Street, discarded her pocket, her client, when he became penniless, only for him to be picked up by Kitty Fisher. So our introduction to Kitty Fisher, who is 10 years younger than Fanny Murray, and in reality takes over really the mantle of Fanny Murray as the leading courtesan in London in the 1760s. She's born in London in impoverished circumstances. She's apprenticed to a milliner at a very young age. She was pretty and witty, and was introduced in society in her late teens by Lieutenant Anthony George Martin. And very quickly she became one of the leading courtesans in London, if not the most famous of all. Rather like Fanny Murray, her appearance and dress was copied. She was written about in newspapers and magazine articles and so on, and she was quite adept at manipulating the press in a way which we would recognise. On one occasion she was riding in St James Park and had a tumble from her horse, and it suggested that this was stage managed, and drawings appeared of Kitty Fisher in mid-tumble with a considerable expanse of leg exposed. She was painted by the leading artists of the day. Joshua Reynolds painted her on at least 4 occasions. There's one portrait of her holding a goldfinch. There's another of Kitty Fisher as Cleopatra dissolving the pearl. And engravings were made of these paintings. Prints were taken of the engravings and sold in their thousands. The Cleopatra image is interesting because that sort of embodies extravagance. And Kitty Fisher was renowned for her extravagance. When Casanova came to London, he was very keen to meet Kitty Fisher and he was most impressed. He recorded that she was wonderfully dressed, and it's no exaggeration to say had diamonds worth 500,000 francs. Casanova also mentioned the banknote sandwich anecdote that we heard about Fanny Murray. Only on this occasion, Casanova said it was a £100 note. So there's been inflation since Fanny Murray's time. She was known for her wit as well as her beauty. On one occasion, Lady Coventry was admiring her dress and asked for the name of her dressmaker. And Kitty Fisher replied, well, you better ask your husband because he bought the dress. Now, it was the ambition of most courtesans to marry one of their wealthy clients before their good looks and their fame faded. And Kitty Fisher was successful in this. In 1766, she married John Norris, who was MP for Rye in Sussex. I can imagine the Norris family weren't terribly keen on this match, but she is recorded as having sorted out his terrible finances and also reformed his rather dissolute habits. Rather sadly, Kitty Fisher falls ill 6 months after getting married. It could possibly have been consumption, TB, it might have been smallpox. It's also suggested it may have been lead poisoning from the use of cosmetics. So she headed for Bristol to take the waters at the Hot Wells and was staying in Bath at the 3 Tuns Inn, which was in Stall Street. It's not there anymore, but the back of the 3 Tuns is now the Crystal Palace in Abbey Green. Her health deteriorated overnight and she died the following morning in the arms of her husband. He instructed that her body should lie in state in her finest clothes with ribbons and jewellery, sparkling jewellery and so on. And the people of Bath were invited to pay the last respects to her beauty. Her body was then taken to Benenden in Kent, the family seat of the Norris family, and she was buried in her best ball gown. But the memory of Kitty Fisher dying in Bath didn't die easily, and some years later, Henry Harrington, who later became mayor of Bath, composed a poem entitled Kitty Fisher Lying in State in Bath. Might be my specs for this. Alas, what boast hath blooming youth, since this Florella lies, paleness o'er her damask cheek, and closed her beauteous eyes. If fade those glories of her face, why such frailty trust, when virtue still its sweetness keeps, and blossoms in the dust? They don't write them like that anymore.